My studio guests are executive recruitment specialists Anne Pratt as well as Steve Lucas. And at the level that you're operating at, I mean, are CEOs simply drawn to the salary that a company offers them, or are there other factors?
Pat, I think money often comes at the end. I mean, there is a sort of minimum standard because people get used to a standard of living. What has changed in South Africa, 10 years ago, location of employment for senior executives was not an issue. Today, that's almost the first or second question people ask. Location has become a critical factor. And that's a kind of housekeeping factor, but it can be a deal breaker. The high-level issues are, is it the kind of organisation I can relate to? How crunchy is the challenge? Because most good people want to get up to a tough challenge in the morning. And money tends to follow thereafter.
Steve, let's flip that coin. Why are executives wanting to leave the companies that they're at?
I think certainly my experience of that would be that within organisations, changes in policy, changes in direction driven by outside influences can certainly be a significant impact. I think shareholders become ever more short-term in that if they've been given an expectation of some delivery and that's missed, then the pressure exerted by shareholders today when organisations will find 3 or 4 potential shareholders have a very significant influence. Hedge funds more greatly get in on the scene quickly and scent blood and can quickly swing an organisation's attitude to its staff members or senior executives. So I think we're not only seeing internal impact, we're seeing the influence of shareholders being executed probably far more significantly than we might have done 5 years ago.
My producer Helene did some hard work on pulling together some stats. Let's just have that up in terms of salaries and trying to, work them all out in US dollars so we have something common to work from. Is this something that you, Steve, have to struggle with, or is it actually a benefit when you're looking to move people around the globe and to different companies that might have head offices in different parts of the world?
I think, without sounding too flippant, it depends on which direction you're trying to send people in. When I left university, my lecturer told me the richest I'd ever feel was the day after my first paycheck, because I hadn't spent what I'd earned at that point, and yet from here on in I would be spending what I was earning. And I think a challenge is, if you look at that UK number, trying to get UK executives moving to other parts of the world does create problems, because although this probably doesn't take account of cost of living, psychologically, if somebody has been earning whatever figure that might be and they're told that they're going to halve that, even if the cost of living is 75% reduced, still there is a psychological impact which one has to get over. And I do take account of Anne's point, which is money might come at the end, but it tends to come earlier on if you're asking people to take a cut.
And what does this mean for a South African executive? I mean, the obvious thing is that there are better opportunities elsewhere, but is that necessarily so?
When people are looking at international careers, it's more about having global experience, experience in foreign markets, and again, that's a competence that more and more companies are looking for. I think when people want to leave an organisation, it's, and I think Steve alluded to this earlier, some of the cultural aspects aren't working out, things that people were promised haven't materialised. I think, prospects for growth. I think if an organisation hasn't really got a balance between keeping people moving through the ranks so there's still career prospects to grow and reach, have promotions, etc.
But there must also be issues around the socio-political situation in the country. You hear about this. Steve's nodding, I'll come to you in a second, but there certainly must be an element of that when you sit and you're talking to someone who might be considering leaving the country.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of unspoken tension. I think where companies, and again, where companies have been progressive around change, so being promoted is not so much a race issue, it's really a question of competence and balancing competence with transformation. Where companies haven't done that so well and they're trailing behind, the whole issue of diversity and giving, people of colour preference in terms of those opportunities, that creates a tension. So I think it really depends on how progressive the organisation has been. Do they have a track record, and to what extent that's an issue. So, and then if they're trailing behind and there's a greater need and a more desperate need, and they're putting people of colour in who maybe don't have the track record, you know, that creates an underlying resentment. So people say, I'm feeling blocked.
Steve?
Look, I think all of these things probably revolve around balance, but I think balance is dictated by what the benchmark has been historically. And I think one of the challenges South Africa has is that possibly in the past that benchmark hasn't been as equitable as it might have been in Western Europe or the United States or Australasia. And so consequently, to swing that pendulum to a more central position probably takes a more radical approach in the short term. And from my perspective, it's a word that I think people frown at sometimes, but many organisations in this country, I think, are now recognising the importance of succession planning, because succession planning isn't only about just finding the next executives, it's giving that path for the new starters to understand how they can progress within an organisation. I think it sends a very clear message to people. There is a commitment to find talent within an organisation and develop it. And so my hope for this nation is that it recognises the importance of being able to give those talented individuals who are prepared to come in at the bottom and work hard to gain that credibility and therefore that executive status, the opportunity to move through a business. And I think if they do, my experience of South Africa is some hugely innovative entrepreneurial individuals, and it seems a shame to me that they might look to countries like the UK or the US at the moment as their location to be able to not hit a glass ceiling, and therefore they are prepared to move to those places. And I think Anne's absolutely right. In those situations, money is probably less important than the opportunity to step out of what they might think is a closed sort of progression for them in this country and move to places where possibly succession planning is slightly more advanced in its thinking, and therefore people can say, if I join here and I do a good job and I don't step out of line, then I can understand where I could be in 5 years' time. And possibly that's still something that needs to happen.
And I'll give you the last word. Obviously, what we want to do is keep talented people here in South Africa. That's got to be our goal. The nation needs talented executives.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Pat. And I think the real way to do that is to send a message right from our president downwards that there is a future for all South Africans. I know the president recently called on retired white executives to come back and help the state-owned enterprises. And I think what's equally important is that it's not just words that are spoken, but people see real examples of that.
Thank you both very, very much. Executive recruiters are not only agents bringing different parties together, but have become an integral part of the corporate environment. It's a trend that's growing worldwide. They can and do influence the flow of talent worldwide. It might be the only instance that some consider themselves lucky to be hunted, and in a modern world, not just for their heads. Your thoughts on today's discussion, please. For this week, that's Inside Out.
I think the subtleties of great managers are those who are in a position to be able to present themselves in a way that can be understood by all groups of people. And I think if Anne would probably concur with the fact that the best CEOs can talk to the most junior staff just as eloquently as they can to the most important shareholders.
They say Africa isn't for sissies, and I think if you look at what leaders have to navigate their way through in this country, I think those attributes. I think also, not only in a South African context, but I think globally, the ability to deal with change, with cultural diversity, I think those qualities where people really inherently show that they're able to do that, not because they have to, but because they want